So we're going to start off talking about the Twitch Super Evil Megacorp deal. For those of you that aren't familiar, a few months ago there was a multi-million-dollar, multi-year deal signed between Super Evil Megacorp and Twitch that is going to see a lot of co-production, co-marketing around Super Evil Megacorp's popular mobile MOBA, say that 3 times fast, Vainglory. So Ryan, you want to talk a bit about kind of why was Twitch interested in going into specifically Vainglory, but also getting into mobile esports?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you hit some of the keys right off the bat there. There's so many mobile devices out there. We have a pretty decent amount of viewership on our mobile platform, some 70 some odd billion minutes watched on it. So mobile is a very interesting environment for Twitch as a company. And looking at Super Evil Megacorp and Vainglory in particular, it bridges a gap for us of the kind of classic PC esports component with that mobile audience, a very core esports game that our existing PC audience is very familiar with, very good at understanding, something that kind of we understand how the esports works, but an audience that we can branch out into. So very interesting for Twitch from that perspective.
What are the challenges you see with you guys producing and covering a mobile esport versus your traditional, say, computer and console-based esports like a League of Legends or a Dota?
Yeah, I would say that there's a number of challenges with it, definitely. It has a different general audience, kind of like where people are watching, how they're watching, the age groups that are watching them. So kind of identifying what really resonates with that audience and makes the mobile experience very positive for users is different than the traditional PC audience.
Definitely. And Evan, I think what's interesting to note is despite it being on mobile, you guys have put a lot of work into Vainglory specifically to make it interesting to watch. We talk a lot about kind of how it mimics those ticks that you get in a traditional sporting event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really for Vainglory in particular, what's important is that we didn't set out to make a esport on mobile. I don't think you can just say we are going to do an esport. I think only the Twitch viewers, only the community can tell you if you are an esport. We just wanted to make the best damn game that we could on a mobile platform and try to start to change people's minds about what was possible on mobile, making an actual core game with kind of the belief that if we made a good enough game, people from League of Legends or where have you might, realize that it was legitimate, but also that there is a whole generation of mobile-first gamers who are playing match 3 or whatever they're doing, and they just don't realize that core games exist. We all grew up on core games. We all grew up with these deep, immersive experiences with massive amounts of strategy and tactics, and we felt like this was a really underserved market, that if players realized what was out there, the ones who were browsing the App Store or Google Play, if they discovered a game like this, if they discovered a core game on mobile that really lived up to the hype, that really had a powerful enough engine and a smart enough design, that they would be hooked just like all of us were growing up on consoles or PCs. And specifically to the question you were asking, one of the things that was most important to me when I was, first considering joining Super Evil was, in looking at the game itself, did it have those types of anticipation beats, the types of things that make a game really compelling to experience, not just as a player, but also as a spectator. If you think about it in terms of, when a quarterback throws a ball in the air, you don't know if the receiver is going to come down with it for a touchdown. You don't know if it's going to be incomplete. You don't know if the cornerback is going to intercept it. And what I began to realize very quickly was that the designers who set out to make Vainglory really understood this, understood what it meant to have anticipation and suspense in a game. And those are really some of the cornerstones of having something that is good to spectate as well as to play.
And it's a very interesting point. Brian, I want to ask you a bit about this. So this is a very different type of mobile game than we've seen in the past. If you look at like some of the other popular esports titles that are mobile right now, you look at Blizzard with Hearthstone, you look at Clash Royale. How is your approach different for a game like this versus one of those games that is more of a casual watching experience?
So background-wise, I come from the PC audience as well. So it meshes very nicely with what I kind of knew and loved growing up with PC titles. Kind of that, what everything just Evan talked about with those anticipation moments, those experience moments. When users are coming in from the front page, a lot of times they won't even be able to tell, like, hey, this is not being played on a PC. So that's kind of a one of those kind of surprise moments for a lot of people saying, oh man, I can play this in the airport or on the BART while I'm under the bay, which I have done and do when I go home pretty much every day. So it's that unique experience of just being accessible and being available. So approaching it compared to a like a Hearthstone or a Clash type of game, you have the ability to bring in a lot more of the initial, like the audience moments that competitive League gamers or competitive Dota gamers are familiar with, those structures that they're familiar with, the tournament brackets that they're familiar with, the players that they're familiar with.
And it's funny because this really does happen where we'll have a Twitch feature, we'll have some people who are familiar with the game, a lot of people who aren't, and they'll just be, experiencing it as a MOBA until it cuts to the player, say at a major tournament like FooJee has played quite a bit internationally in Korea, representing North America, and they cut to the players, and one of the things that's so interesting about a competitive game on mobile is you have, some really young players who have a phone right up to their eyes. They like to get the smallest device possible for the most precision possible, and they play with their thumbs. You get European players who are on big iPad Pros. You get a big range in those form factors, the posture. Some players leaning way back. One player is now famous for, putting a device on a pillow and has a branded pillow line. And it's not until the camera cuts to the pro players playing on the device of choice in the way that they choose that you get a big pop in the chat. And a lot of it are people who have never seen this before, and they'll say, what is this? Are you kidding me? A touchscreen, esport. But a lot of people then realize, oh, all right, this actually can work. You can use a touchscreen to kite and juke faster than using a mouse. This can be a legitimate thing. And when they try it for themselves, some of them convert, some of them don't. But I think overall, we've kind of cleared the initial bar of, can you do this on mobile? Is it legitimate and authentic on mobile? And now is more about, kind of what's possible as an esport or a game.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk a bit more about how that happened, because traditionally before Vainglory, and even arguably now, it's been more of a soft-core to mid-core market. And you guys are very much going after that hardcore gamer market, which traditionally hasn't taken mobile games seriously. What did that journey look like for you guys from that initial Apple announcement to where you are now, where you have an established esport, you have organizations like Ben's that are involved in it? Like, how did that come about?
Oh yeah, so you mentioned two kind of disparate things. I can speak to them both, but on the esports side, like I said, we weren't setting out to make an esport. We were just setting out to make the best game we could, and we didn't even have spectator mode, which is the prerequisite for any type of competitive MOBA or competitive esport. It wasn't even on the product roadmap to start. We were just trying to nail the gameplay, but the players wouldn't wait. Right off the bat, they started, taking this 3v3 MOBA and using one of the three players as a spectator camera and playing 2v2, which was something we didn't intend, something we didn't balance for, something we didn't want. And then immediately after that, homegrown community organizations started running tournaments, and it started to pick up steam, and we realized that we had to reorient. Fortunately, we were small enough and agile enough that we could, but that we had to reorient around what the players wanted, which was to be able to play this competitively and to be able to support watching it. So we switched up the roadmap. We've only been what I would consider a, legitimate competitive game or an esport, if you want to go that far, for less than a year. But we had 150 million minutes watched in 2015 of esports alone, $350,000 prize pool. And for me, the most gratifying thing was these live events where, like, we just had the Spring Live Championships at the Avalon in Hollywood on the Walk of Fame, and was actually sold out, oversold crowds, where we had to turn people away at the door, open up balconies and roped up areas to try to fit in the maximum number of people. And you know what? That's not selling out Staples Center. That's nowhere near League of Legends, but it's an encouraging sign that people are interested in something like this. You mentioned the Apple keynote, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, which is, if Apple calls up and they want to consider you, in this case it was September 2014, the iPhone 6 keynote, and I believe we were the only app that was featured in that presentation at all, not even game. And that was a long, very interesting process to see if we would be the ones selected, and ultimately we were. And I think it was because they were, in introducing Metal and in introducing the iPhone 6, they were looking for something that could really show what was possible to do on these types of devices, and our engine was the best example, and our game was the best example of what the future might hold on these devices. So, fast forward till now, and we've actually reached the point where we have, the deal with Twitch, we have sponsorship with Amazon, Nvidia, Samsung, Red Bull, and now that we've had all these homegrown teams like FooJee's team, that is where we started out in competitive, but now Team Solo Mid, G2 Esports, SK Gaming, Mouse Sports, Team Secret, all of these pro organizations that people are familiar with have all come into the game, and we hear all the time as we run these major tournaments now that that more professional organizations are scouting it out. But for our journey here, what was most important to me as we started going into competitive was first to really try to surface as much teams and talent as possible. I'm not sure if it's something that has really been done before, but we started out running 128 team March Madness style bracket tournaments just because we wanted to see what kind of talent was out there. Was there enough talent out there to do this in a legitimate competitive way? And would there be an upper crust of players, a 1% of players that would rise to the top in terms of talent, mechanical ability, and smarts the way you see in other professional sports? And we did see that. We did see, a small layer of elite players rise up and begin to dominate on the top teams. Eventually, a number of those teams got acquired by the professional organizations, and then kind of fast forward till now where we've actually divided off the top 8 teams and they're playing in their own league in summer season, while we still have a very important community layer where we're seeing if there are any community teams that are good enough to knock these top teams out of their spot and take it over.
Which is a very interesting and slightly different approach than you've seen from some of the traditional esports competitive game developers. You look at like what Blizzard and League and Riot do, it's very much new game comes out, throw a bunch of money at a tournament, try to get those top level teams in immediately, and then they seem to at least recently have issues keeping those teams on board once that initial prize pool dries up, where you guys have taken a more of a grassroots approach, such as with Gankstars. And Ben, I'd like to talk a bit about that. Like, what did you see as a competitor, as a player, as an eventual team owner? What did you see about this game and about mobile as a platform in general that drew you to Vainglory?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I started playing Vainglory, I remember specifically downloading it because I thought it would be a game that wouldn't distract me from like other life responsibilities I was focused on at the time. And this would have been 2014 as well, December. And when I played it, because I have played lots of League, Dota, I've been a gamer since I can remember. My first memory, I think, was with like an Atari in my hand. So I've always enjoyed it, but I've never really grew attached to a game so competitively, so quickly. And I think what did it was just always there when I wanted to play it. That was the first thing. I mean, like, I have a gaming PC. I've streamed on Twitch in the past and in other platforms, but when you wanted to play, you had to like dedicate the moment to go play. Like, you had to sit down at your computer or wherever your console was at. And when I started playing Vainglory, it was on my phone. And I just remember, like, anytime I wanted to play it, I would just pull it out, play a couple of games, put it back, go do something else. And I kept finding myself, like, when I was on the go wanting to play, it was just fun, it was quick, it was easy and accessible. And it wasn't like every other mobile game at the time, meaning that like there's a lot of really great time killers on mobile platform, especially back then, but it was something that it had strategy, it had a competitive edge, and you could tell when you were playing that people were really interested in trying to beat one another. And this was before the game even had like a chat functionality. Like, this was really early, and you would go to the community forums and see passion. People were like constantly making suggestions for what could be next and what they were excited about. And I think the community was very healthy in the beginning, and that was a bit of a cry from a lot of times, playing in solo queue or something in like League of Legends, where there was a lot more toxicity because people were really focused on being the best and thinking they were the best. And this new MOBA had came out that was easily accessible. You could play whenever you wanted, and the community was very positive and very healthy. And I thought that this is an interesting area to be in because it's new, it's mobile, but at the same time, the community is so young and so vibrant that it could basically go wherever it wants. And the community really drove it forward. As Evan mentioned, the competitive scene grew because we wanted it to grow as a community, not because SCMC came to us and said, we want to run tournaments. It was like, can you guys please put a spectator mode in? Can you guys please do these things, because we feel like there's so much potential here, and the audience is unique. It's kids that don't have maybe a PC or console, but they all have some kind of iPad or some kind of tablet or smartphone in their home, and they're really good, and at a young age. And when we saw this, it felt good. It's hard to describe any other feeling than that. I mean, I feel like sometimes when you catch a drift of something that's going to be really positive in your life, you just have a certain feeling. And I think for Gankstars, I wasn't originally in Gankstars back then. I actually was just a casual player. I joined a well-known organization called Nemesis that's still around today as well. And it was just a bunch of talented players from all over the world that played together. And the more we played, the more people came in. The competition kept rising. The challenges kept getting tougher and tougher until eventually we got spectator mode in, actually ran a couple of these homegrown tournaments and realized, wow, there's actually something here. There's a lot of people watching. There's a lot of hype around the game. And I remember when we did the first partnering with ESL for the European tournament, and that was kind of the first big foray into an official major tournament. Everyone was scrambling to find the best teams and the best players and who they could fit together. And it was at this time that I was making a lot of personal decisions about what I wanted to do in the esport industry. And I decided that I needed to start talking with people that were very serious, because we caught wind during ESL that there were other orgs, like I'd already mentioned, pro orgs, that had kind of wanted to know what was going on. And it made sense for me to start talking with Alex Novosad, who's one of the other co-owners of Gankstars, about kind of paving a future for this. There are players that are just skilled. Why not find a home for them? Why not provide support for them? Why not give them somewhere that they feel safe, they can practice, they can strategize, and feel support by a leadership team, by coaching or something along those lines? But it just all started at this very organic point. It wasn't forced. It was just, hey, this feels right. Let's just see where it goes.
I think that's probably the most important point. There's very little talk there of anything mobile specific other than why you initially got into the game. I think what we might find more and more is that the platform doesn't really matter, and that, say, Ryan, in 10 years when we grew up on consoles, right? But the people that are growing up now on phones, I'm dating all of us, we're old enough that we all grew up on consoles, but if you grow up on phones, do you see a future where a majority of the streaming we're doing is these type of mobile games on these powerful phones that we have in our pockets versus the $4,000 or $5,000 investment you might have in a gaming computer, and the mobile becomes the norm?
I think the gameplay absolutely will be that way. You just look at the sheer number of devices, the accessibility, emerging markets in particular, and mobile has a lot of growth potential when it comes to esports. And not even just potential, I would say growth expectations at this point. I do think that there's always going to be the high-value production segment. PCs aren't going to go anywhere. You're still going to be doing your high-quality streaming through PC setups. But the sheer accessibility and the fact that everyone now is growing up with a touchscreen, that's kind of the direction that we see things moving forward.
It really is, a potential just generational shift. Our COO had his nephew visit from Finland recently and was playing Vainglory, and we were trying to explain to him, no, traditionally MOBAs are played on PCs and hugely popular, hugely successful, and he couldn't really wrap his brain, as a young kid, couldn't really wrap his brain around how you would do this with a mouse and keyboard rather than touching the screen. It was just something completely foreign to him. And as the person who was introducing the panel said in the very beginning, PC's addressable audience of about 800 million, mobile about 3 billion, trending quickly toward 5 billion. So I don't know if our game is going to be the game that hits this. We're going to take our best shot at it. But someone is going to have a game that hits this big enough on mobile that it's not just even an esport. That is a mainstream sport at that point. And my background, I spent 10 years in professional sports before going into the gaming industry. There's going to be something that is that big. And we'll try. We'll see if it's us, but someone's going to nail it.
So to kind of wrap things up, if we could give 1 or 2 pieces of advice from a game developer standpoint for if somebody's working on a mobile game that they see as potentially being competitive and even in the future potentially becoming a broadcast esport, what is the advice that you could give those developers?
Well, I think the best advice is something you alluded to earlier, which is you can't just throw money at this and have a bunch of pageantry and throw a bunch of money at some celebrity names and think that you can call yourself an esport and set yourself apart and somehow have that be a legitimate experience for, the FooJees of the world, the players, or the viewing experience. You just have to make a game that is worthy of competitive play and worthy of spectation, and then the community will tell you if there is something there. I think that's really the biggest advice, and then just make sure that you stay very, very plugged in to what your community actually cares about. Something, as Ben mentioned earlier, we did really from day one, something that I wanted to do as head of the community, was see if we could build something that wasn't toxic, that was actually supportive, that didn't have the cynicism that's typically associated with a MOBA community, and as long as we could have like a legitimate one-to-one relationship. When we went out in beta in Singapore, I was literally there talking to individual players, and we quickly scaled out of that being possible, especially after the Apple keynote and the Jimmy Fallon, Justin Timberlake commercial. But trying to stay as connected to the players as possible, make sure that there is never a PR layer between you and the players, to be as authentic as you possibly can. We would say, oh yeah, we completely screwed that up, but we hear you, we know what you care about, we know this matters to you, and we're going to make it our top priority and address it. Just be as authentic with the players as you possibly can, and they will tell you what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. Be agile, tacked into what they care about, and you'll be able to make a game that they think is worthy of an esports experience.
Awesome. So authentic and organic. Those are the 2 words we'll sum it up with. Awesome. Well, Evan, Ryan, Ben, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys taking the time to talk with everybody today.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark Atkinson from Vesta. I guess a question for Evan and a question for Ryan, which is, what is the current payments model that you use on PC, and then how do you have to adapt that for the mobile format?
That's all you
Oh,
said.
so in-game we have no pay to win. We have no energy mechanics or anything else. We don't have, you could argue we don't have enough compulsion loops or trying to make money off of people. Really, the only way you make any money out of Vainglory is when the players get invested and they care about it enough, they'll want to buy more heroes, expand their hero pool beyond what is given to you from the outset or is in the free hero rotation. And when they want to make their experience feel fresh and new again, that they can buy skins for those heroes to augment them. We also, we have some interesting kind of innovative systems around getting those skins where people don't want to just spend money from the outset, that they can work on collecting cards and acquiring the fragments that they need to eventually get those skins, and there's some money that can come out of that process as well. But one of the things that we set out from the beginning was to say, this is going to be a legitimate core game where it's not pay to win. There's nothing you can do in the game that will give you a competitive advantage. It will always be teamwork and skill that wins out in the end. But if you want to support the game and if you want to have more choice, more variety, make things feel fresh and new again, that there are things that you can do to spend money within the environment. Okay, so for Vainglory was built from the ground up for touchscreens, to be touchscreen first, right? It's on iOS and Android. Our engine that was built by Tommy Kroll that engine is powerful enough that it could do Xbox One games, it could do PS4 games, but our founders from the very beginning said, we think that MOBA on mobile is an untapped market, that there's massive opportunity here, that somebody is going to get this right and is going to make a lot of people happy and make a lot of money. So that's where we went from the outset. So all of our payment structure within the game itself is through Apple, through the App Store, and through Google Play and Amazon App Store as well. All of those different stores that are set up as part of those platforms. And that's really the only thing that mobile users are used to, is just going through those, uniform flows that exist for all games.
Hi, this is for Evan. This is not really a question, just feedback. I'm a huge fan of Vainglory. I've probably logged 1,200 wins. My husband I've been playing since the soft launch, and
What's your player name?
Master Sifu. If you want to load up, I actually don't need any credit. I just want to say it's a beautiful game. You guys have mastered synchronous play on MOBA. It's beautiful. I'm a director of monetization. I wanted so badly to spend money in your game, but you've made it to a point where you're able to engage in the game. And for users that are really committed, the one way to support you guys, as you said, is to buy skins. And the way you've kind of created trading cards while you're waiting to partner, folks up into a rank or a casual, to casual battle is really cool, where you're still keeping the user interactive rather than just staring at that 1 minute, wait time. I'm sure you guys are doing a lot of great things, but I would love to be able to get into a battle within 20 seconds, but I'm sure that's just, getting more players at scale. So not really a question, just a huge fan. So.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, and honestly, I think you're absolutely right. I think early on, because we had to first convince, media that you could do core on mobile, and then persuade players that, core on mobile was a legitimate experience, all of our early effort and focus was on that in-game experience, on the quality of the match itself. And as you probably know, but maybe not everyone in this room, what we've really been focused on over the past few months has been making sure that we have a world-class app that is every bit as good as the gameplay itself, where as we haven't spent any marketing on the game at all to date. We've really wanted to get the app to a certain place first. And as we begin to spend, and as we begin to see more and more players come in, that they don't have to get punched in the face 5 times before they find the fun, that they have a legitimate, great experience right from the outset. And while I think, we definitely, I think FooJee can speak to, we have the scale to, have matches kicking off pretty fast and have legitimate competitive experiences, and have kind of tried to tune things for, say, Battle Royale as a 7-minute experience to be an easier entry point for people who are coming in who are mobile first. But it's so interesting because on PC, you might be used to waiting 10, 15 minutes for a match at certain levels of skill, and the expectation is very different on mobile. So if you feel like you're waiting too long, that's something that we have to adapt to, because it's not that we don't have the liquidity, it's actually that we're setting the matchmaking tuning such that we have more time to try to find a superior match for you so that you have a better experience. So that's great feedback.
Thanks. You just mentioned a better experience. I'm curious, and maybe FooJee, you can talk to this. What are some of the challenges of playing competitive MOBA at your level on a device without a hard connection? No one has addressed that. It's a big deal for a lot of people. All three of you could probably speak to this in a different way, but as a player, what are some of the challenges you have to overcome playing something on a mobile device?
Well, the number one challenge is what you just mentioned. Wi-Fi is not the most reliable way to obviously connect to the internet, have the right kind of ping setting to be able to compete. What's most important really is your ping to the server and how close you are. So whether we've been, most tournament settings, all tournament settings that are not in a live setting, everyone's just in their own personal connection space. And that actually, in and of itself, could be a potential issue, because when you talk about the competitive scene as a whole, there's probably still a lot of untapped potential based purely on the fact that maybe this kid's parents just they don't have good internet. Like their internet is maybe like slower, or they live in a more rural area, so they don't have access to higher broadband speeds.
Or maybe their brother is watching Netflix while they're trying to play in a tournament.
Like downloading stuff, uploading stuff. So those are definitely concerns that I can't necessarily say there's a particular answer for, but what I will say is that when it comes to live settings, I know SCMC has spent a lot of work in making sure that the rig that's set up for those areas it's pretty much like unadulterated connection speed at as like high fidelity possible, so that if there is any issue at all, it's experienced by everyone or no one. So I do think it's come a long way. I went to the very first international tournament in South Korea in Seoul. It was actually just about a year ago now. And that was the first time OGN, one of the biggest esport companies out there, had ever done like a mobile game. And we were all figuring it out at the same time. It was like, oh, well, we're on this frequency and we're having these lag spikes in the middle of a tournament game. This is not good, right? So ever since then, there's been constant effort being put into doing it. There are other hurdles that could be taken away, though, and that meaning that there are devices and there are companies that make like mobile tablets for gaming that you can hardwire into a connection. And I know now, at least with some of the recent updates even coming from Apple, you can buy their newest like adapter, which will give you the opportunity to plug your iPad directly into a router. So some of the mobile devices are getting closer to being able to do it. It's always optimal if you can plug in directly. But I would say that's probably the number one thing, is just like, is the connection strong? Is the ping strong enough for us to be able to all play? And once that's taken care of, everything else seems a little bit easier, at least coming from the player perspective. And then it's more so about like what they need to do to orchestrate the tournaments and make sure everything's running smoothly.
So I used to work for the National Hockey League, and they had an ice guru, right? And Edmonton is perfectly fine. It's in Canada. It's the only thing they do is play hockey there. Playoffs, they're fine. But when you want to have an event at the Boston Garden, or you want to have playoffs in Madison Square Garden, and the circus was there 2 days before, driving massive spikes, through the ice into the ground. They had to have this ice guru come and work his magic and try to get the ice into a shape where it was worthy of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And in some sense, it's been really no different for us, where we end up having like our internet guru who travels to all the major events, who has a special setup and tournament server that he puts in place that kind of uses all the tricks that we've learned over this year of all of these international tournaments to make sure that the connection is completely sound for the players in these tournaments. And we believe that we've pretty much got that down to a science. But as FooJee was talking about, when it comes to playing from home, the game itself is, always sub 30-second MS, but what is your own connection like? If you manage to get 20 or 30 down, you should actually be fine with Vainglory. It really isn't that intensive, but there's all sorts of, there could be throttling going on with your ISP, or an underground line that gets compromised in Southeast Asia, or all sorts of different things can happen that can affect people's experience. And we have a live ops team that is constantly, all they do around the clock is try to assess, is there something going on that we can do anything about, or is it just, people's local setups of varying quality?
Actually, a couple other things that just weren't mentioned with it. The structure, all the games are played on dedicated servers. So that eliminates a lot of the, there's no peer-to-peer connectivity issues there. So that's one of the biggest pieces that gets added in. I will also say, just from experiential side, for the vast majority of non-competitive players, they can play on a wide range of different connectivity. I mean, I mentioned earlier, I play on the BART going underneath the SF Bay, so it's like it is fairly tolerant from that perspective. But for the very high level competitive guys, we kind of give them like, yeah, you should be on the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, you should have a nice router with good QoS kind of things.
But it's interesting, like we've had tournaments where we assumed these players must be in the absolute optimal setup, where they have, the blast Uber speed, whatever they can get out of Comcast, and they're in the perfect environment and they have no distractions. And, a team will finish winning a tournament and you'll realize that like they're just sitting in the hallway at school on 4G, right? And you're like, okay, well, that's another way to go about that, right? They're just kids and they're having their own experiences. Well, I guess some of them are kids. Ben is a little more mature. We have some of
Feel
our
like a
best,
kid.
yeah,
Feel like
some
a
of our
kid.
best players probably get as young as 12, 13, but it goes all the way up into the 30s of, the best players in the world.
They're all 13 now. The last one who was 12, his birthday was Saturday.
That's good.
So
I'm
yeah,
glad.
they're all 13 now.
That's good to know.
Yes, I just want to know like how you guys start up a game and try to prevent toxicity from happening in the first place. Like, what do you implemented like gameplay time and the communication within the games, and then and another question is like how does the community build up in this game? Like, how did it start up and how does it grow up to become something that is so welcoming? Like, for example, I'm a fighting game player, so for me, like the community is like very welcoming and very. They always give out advice or something like that, like tips and yeah, something like that.
Absolutely. So we launched in beta in the Philippines and Singapore, which maybe was the smartest thing we could have possibly done, because trying to introduce this new concept right from day one of saying we want to build a positive, supportive community that doesn't have the same toxicity that you associate with MOBA typically was something that that culture in that region immediately embraced and has never really lost, to the point now where in those parts of the world, our player base, the numbers, when you look at the per capita, it's absolutely ridiculous how many players we have in Southeast Asia and all of the kind of meetup things that they run where they all get together and play in person, which is an aspect we haven't talked about a lot, but really unlocking the potential of people getting together in the same space and playing and communicating, both for tactics and for fun, has ended up being becoming a huge part of the experience. So it was really just being very deliberate from the beginning about how we engage with our players and the type of community that we were trying to create. But then, as we had to make decisions about the game itself, we deliberately chose not to introduce in-game chat. We have a ping system instead with tactical pings and social emote pings that you can use to, Ben can speak to how effectively you can communicate. I think you can communicate pretty well, whether it's how you're doing emotionally or what you want someone to do tactically. But we made decisions like that specifically so that people couldn't rage at each other, couldn't say outrageously horrible things. And very quickly the community began to police itself and began to kind of set standards for what was acceptable behavior if you wanted to be a part of this kind of greater family, and they take care of most of that for us now. Right to the point where, we'll still screw up stuff all the time. We'll mess up, a server could go down, or we'll release a feature that has a bug in it or something like that, and we're very, very fortunate that the community will still always come to our defense, be our biggest evangelists, where they'll use this I love VG hashtag, and we'll tell the people who are newer to the game, don't worry, they're listening, they always respond really rapidly, they'll have this fixed before you know it, and because of that, we don't have to do a lot of defending ourselves. We can focus on just trying to respond to what the community tells us that they want and make sure our features live up to our internal standards.
And it has to do with the authenticity and the communication. So, for example, during the server downtimes, like they'll have little scrolls on the bottom with like the engineer's current status of hair on fire or whatever every time. But it's like you just kind of be authentic and communicate with the community, and they really receive that pretty well. I would also like to give a nod to all the community organizations that have been building up, like Gankstars, that have been building up the community in a positive way, encouraging players, welcoming them, bring them in, and go ahead and talk about that a bit.
Yeah, perhaps it seems obvious when you say you need to be positive and connected to the community. It almost seems kind of like a cop-out response, but if you actually do it and you don't just say it, then you notice the difference in the community. I think when it comes to Super Evil Megacorp, from the very beginning, they weren't just trying to make a great game. They were always constantly reaching out and connecting and pulling people to their headquarters and always doing weekly developer streams where they talked to the community and they let them know what was coming and exciting things on the horizon and invited them to events that were happening. And then the community just really thrive from it. And when you can see that the developers actually care about not just the game, but you want to give back. And we mentioned it earlier, but the fact that they stayed 100,000 times away from pay to win, made it even more of a genuine gaming experience, because a lot of mobile games are like, if some of them are almost pay to play. Like, it's almost like, man, I got to wait 24 hours before I can do something unless I put money into it. So we noticed that, like, they weren't out for the money, like they were out for actually the experience, and it allowed us to just focus on like how much we loved playing and how much we enjoyed playing with one another. And I think it's always kind of a hurdle with MOBAs. Like you mentioned, you're like in fighting games. Yeah. So generally, like in a 1v1 setting, people are just rooting for like a great game, a great match. And when it's done, like, you know, you high five, you're like, you know, really good job, and the crowd's kind of yelling. But in a MOBA experience, if things go wrong, there's always someone around you can point your finger at, or someone that you think perhaps was the problem other than yourself. And that's kind of the nature, I think, a lot of team games. So kind of building that in-game structure where you use social emotes or pings allows people, one, to not only not be able to waste time chatting and bashing the person they maybe think made the mistake, because you can't bring up a keyboard, you can't like spend time in the game doing it. But at the same time, there's also ways to kind of cheer on and support people that did well. And perhaps that's a nuance that may be overlooked in other games. Like, you can thumbs up people, you can talk about the quality of the match, and actually, like, you can get a notification when you're out of the game that, hey, this person just gave you a thumbs up, like, you know, great job. And it may seem simple, but it's actually pretty cool. And I think those kind of little things just make it different than what's been out there now, and that's why the community responds so effectively. And
I can't stress enough that players are smart, and they will sniff out immediately if they're concerned about something, and they will tell immediately if you have gone and asked the PR person what you're allowed to say and gotten an answer and come back and fed that to the community and then feed that to the 50 people who have similar sentiments. They will sniff that out immediately, and they will know that you're not having an authentic relationship with those players. And what we've said from the beginning is we are going to just have a conversation with the players where we're in this together, where they feel like they have co-ownership over this product. And in order to do that, there has to be a high level of authenticity, both talking about what we think we got right and what we're excited about and advocating, but also to own up to our mistakes, to acknowledge when things aren't right, and to talk about what together we want to do to pivot and make it right and move forward in a successful way.
Thank you. Have you found that you've had to do any technology to limit the client-side cheats or anything like that, or anyone using mobile technologies to kind of give them an advantage in the game?
So the game is completely server authoritative. So there's very little that anyone can do on the client side to have any impact, because even if you hack your Android, jailbreak your Android device, do everything you want to do to it, the server will just override it. The game will say, okay, the server's telling me one thing, the client's telling me something else. I'm going to listen to what the server is telling me is the correct thing to do in that moment. So Ben, I don't know if you encountered anything over time that we had to patch or correct, but largely because it is completely server authoritative, there's very little people can do. The only thing that really I've seen is, like, if people want to use BlueStacks or something and try to play on PC, that's something that they can hack to play Vainglory on a PC, but I don't actually see any advantage to that because it's completely touchscreen optimized. So in some ways you just kind of nerf yourself. You just make things harder to do by using a mouse and keyboard.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. All right, thanks everybody.
Hey, thank you, Frank.